The end of the world or the dawn of a greener planet? What's our environmental future? Everyone wants to know, but here's what they most want to know. What on earth is happening to our weather? Some say the world will end in ice, some say in fire. At Sunderland, they've been watching the weather since records began. Climate experts used to worry about the next ice age. Today, they say things are hotting up.
The argument is quite a straightforward one, and that is that the more carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere as a result of the burning of fossil fuels, the greater will be the degree of warming as a result of the increased concentration of those greenhouse gases. That if we look to the future, the next 10, 20 or 30 years, we certainly should anticipate the temperature increases that we've seen in the past decade to continue. Here in the northeast, what we could expect is certainly warmer winters, and if we look back over the past 10 years, we've seen strong evidence of that already. In addition to that, of course, there will be changes in the rainfall regime, and there's a strong probability that the rainfall, in fact, will begin to decrease in the region over the next 10 or 20 years. And it does mean that the northeast of England could be rather sunnier than it is at the moment.
Better weather, good news? Not necessarily for farming. The world's grain baskets could turn to dust, though closer to home we might grow a more colourful range of crops. Water conservation will be a big issue as demand goes up while the rain dries up, but we may think it's worth it for more sunshine. Another problem could be much more erratic day-to-day weather, but it's hard to tell. The picture's still too complicated to give us a clear answer.
I don't really know, but I just think it'll be much hotter because it's been getting hotter like most years.
By then, you never know, the ozone layer might have burnt up, and the polar ice caps might have melted, so that'll be dangerous.
Intriguingly, astronomers believe the sun itself could hold the key to climate change. Sunspots are magnetic patches on the sun's surface which signal that violent activity is coming. Then, outbursts of electrically charged particles bombard the Earth's atmosphere and affect weather patterns. When there have been more sunspots, the Earth has got warmer. And right now, more sunspots are appearing. So is global warming nothing to do with our fossil fuel emissions? Some astronomers say it could be a mixture of what we do and what the sun does.
There's a strong suspicion that we are producing an increase in the surface temperature of the Earth. But also, we think that the increased activity of the sun may also be responsible for an increase in the temperature of the Earth. And we can't quite untangle the two effects.
Whatever the answer, this solar electricity does mean we'll have ringside seats for the Northern Lights. A lot of light's been shed on airborne pollution. We all cause it when we drive our cars, but in industrial towns, air quality's improving as industry is made to clean up. Our rivers are getting cleaner too, but the spotlight remains on chemical companies which still dump in rivers like the Tees. The industry says things will continue to improve, but how much?
We will have got, within the next couple of years, to a situation where the river is living again. It will have fish in it. It will be essentially sort of 95% of the reduction of the chemical effluent. Now, the remaining 5% would be very, very expensive to remove. And I think, like in a lot of questions relating to the environment, it's a question of balance.
But within that leftover 5% are small amounts of new, powerful substances like so-called gender benders, blamed for causing sex changes in fish.
These days there are more pervasive chemicals, and chemicals that we know very little about, that are being discharged quite freely into rivers like the Tees. And really, we have to look at the future for the chemical industry and learn how to use chemicals sustainably and not to pollute the rivers and ultimately the wildlife population and human population as well.
We may have to view industry differently in future if companies do clean up radically. Pollution laws will get tougher, and many firms are investing heavily in clean technology. So who or what will we blame for local pollution?
There is a tendency within society to want to blame somebody, and the chemical industry, for good reason, has been a body that's been worthy of blame. However, it has got its act together, and I think society will be looking for other targets.
Those targets could be antisocial issues spoiling our local environments, like litter, graffiti and noise. Noise pollution is growing, and it'll be less acceptable, so we might hear an end to noisy neighbours and the local pub karaoke. But the way things are going, other noise may be drowned out in the growing roar of traffic. We're heading for gridlock, and we've seen it coming for decades.
Quite frankly, I don't think our present system of transportation, congested roads, congested ports, seaways, aircraft, I don't think it can take this expansion.
No surprise there, but today's visions of future transport are not what you might expect. Predicting trends is the job of the Henley Centre for Forecasting, and here's what they envisaged in a recent report for Barclays Life.
We think there'll be a rail renaissance involving much faster trains, magnetic levitation trains, already developed, already seen them introduced and tested, Germany, Japan, and so the technology is there.
Successors of this prototype could glide at hundreds of miles an hour on magnetic rails with no friction to slow things down. Commuter journeys could take seconds, not minutes, and after that,
one can envisage a future space shuttle which takes you out of the Earth's atmosphere and brings you back in, and means that you can cross the globe in a matter of a couple of hours possibly. And so for the wealthiest in the future, the very wealthiest, it may mean that you could literally commute to San Francisco or commute to Sydney. These are not beyond the realms of possibility. Now they seem completely unreal and bizarre, but a decade from now, 2 decades from now, well, I wouldn't be so sure.
There'd be like cars are powered by oxygen, and the oxygen comes out. And the cars can fly over cars to take over, or blow up them with missiles.
back to reality, and it looks like the future will be one long traffic jam. Car numbers in Britain go up by 10,000 a week, and there could be up to 33 million cars by 2020. Local authorities are using car bans and parking charges to get people back on the train and the bus.
We have to get a balance. We have to be able to accommodate cars in the city centre, car parking in the city centre, where there is a need to use a car, but we have to find subtle and gentle ways of making transit systems more appealing to people so they do use those transit systems.
The government's trying to give priority to public transport, and it hopes to raise the money for new transport systems through pay-as-you-drive schemes and parking taxes. Then people will switch to trams, buses, bikes and trains, and passenger transport will finally be in the fast lane. That's the theory, but transport experts think drivers may revolt, making the government back down.
You may well get a reaction by people to the idea that they should use their cars less, and they'll vote with their wheels. So that despite putting more effort into public transport and exhorting people to walk and to cycle, they will continue to use their cars.
Professor Hill's suggestions start with scrapping the car tax disc.
If we could shift this away from fixed taxes towards a more pay-as-you-go system, then that would be fairer for example, people living in rural areas who would end up paying less. That would be offset, of course, by people in congested urban areas paying a great deal more. And if this means fewer leisure trips, well, then that's a price that we'll have to pay.
The charging could be done with new smart car technology involving an onboard computer in your car and a system of sensors on the road.
The technology there will mean that people can be checked and recorded when they're making journeys, and you'll just be invoiced with your monthly account just as you are with your credit card at the moment. And so the technology there will permit increased road privatisation. And so obviously that provides some disincentives for people to use the car. So there will be some switches towards other forms of transport as well.
Even so, our roads will still be crowded, but technology may offer a solution. In future, your car computer could be in the driving seat.
One can see the technology already in play to regulate distances between cars, so one can envisage a situation in the future whereby you literally sit back and drive along with your speed and the distance between yourself and another car regulated by technology. So road safety should increase in the longer term as well.
Coming up in part 2, genetically engineered food plus the new science which just might solve the energy crisis.
Well, we've just about gone into the space age, I think. We've got steaks that never saw a beef animal at all.
Now, you see this chip thing here? Yeah. These chips are made out of potato. Isn't that marvellous?
But in nutritional terms, I can see no objection to this kind of product.
We've been doing unnatural things to our food for years.
According to Dr. Gao, we'll soon be asking for bacteria and 2 veg.
But is genetic engineering taking things too far? There's mounting concern about genetically modified or GM foods.
There is a public outcry against GM crops at the moment. A recent Mori poll showed that 77% of people are definite that they want a ban on GM crops in this country.
The fuss is about mixing living particles between different types of plants to protect crops against pests and disease, and let weed killers and pesticides work better. You can also get vegetables that don't go off too fast. In Britain, there are already 300 genetic crop testing sites. What happens if the pollen gets mixed up with normal plants?
The worst case scenario would be severe genetic pollution of other crops and wild plants. We could be looking at superweeds running rampant across the countryside, where herbicides would become completely ineffective on them. We'd be looking at wiping out wildlife in the countryside and creating a barren landscape where only these super genetically modified crops can grow.
Biotechnologists say they'll find ways round this, perhaps by creating plants with no pollen. Meanwhile, Europe is bringing in more safeguards. Spearheading that move is one of the region's Euro MPs.
We need a better and wider risk assessment that really does take serious account of possible long-term effects on human health or the natural environment. That can be done, and I think in the new legislation it will be done. That really will stop, I think, some of people's fears about the spreading of these things into the natural environment being realised.
Fears or no fears, shoppers have been snapping up cut-price tomato puree made from GM vegetables. And food labelling offers consumer choice. Is it safe to eat? The experts say yes, as far as we know. We may even get superfoods with added health benefits. For instance, human antibodies, which fight disease, could be added to apple trees. An apple a day really would keep the doctor away. That controversy is still to come, but right now engineers and botanists are working on how to make industrial-type processes happen inside plants.
Imagine, for example, if you could produce diesel fuel for buses in crops, or you could produce biodegradable plastics, or you could produce fast-drying oils for paints in field crops. Well, these are things that are actually already possible, and if you could produce these without using fossil fuels, which is the source of these commodities at the moment, it could be environmentally extremely beneficial.
These plants won't just be sitting there looking colourful, they'll be powerhouses using sunlight and water to trigger internal chemical reactions, making products we can extract. But there's something no one is planning for. Once plants can be engineered to do anything, anywhere, what happens to world agricultural markets?
If you can drastically modify crop plants, so for example we could get oilseed rape plants that would make palm oil, we wouldn't need to import palm oil from Malaysia, and that might have an enormous effect on their economy. And that kind of thing, those kinds of long-term, large-scale effects could disrupt the pattern of trade throughout the world. It's got enormous implications.
Whatever happens, we can't put the genie back in the bottle. Big business sees an opportunity to feed the world at a price. Engineered foods, and maybe animals too, will be part of our future, if the public will stand for it.
Well, I think in 20 years' time, the biotechnology industry and its products will be a lot more accepted than they are now. In many ways, you won't see them or realise they're there, unless, of course, they're pharmaceuticals or food and people are taking them into their bodies, in which case they will have to be labelled and people will have a choice.
There won't be any farmers because it'll be made-up food. There'll just be lots of animals, so animals can live and be like human beings and invent things.
Well, maybe one day. Certainly this century farming's gone through massive changes. From now on, it may take fewer farmers to feed the world, as science reduces the chance of crop failure.
There will be a large number of farmers who become part-time farmers, that they will be earning the majority of their money from off the farm. It already happens in other parts of Europe, and I think we'll start to see that happening here in England.
As predicted years ago, some may even go to work in the new biotechnology industry.
And these are the farm workers of the future.
Subsidies will go, but instead farmers will be given grants to look after the landscape and produce organic and specialty foods. And the public will probably be willing to pay for a partial return to traditional ways.
Farmers have been criticised for denuding the landscape, and there's been a lot of emotive headlines about hedges being pulled out. I think that during the last 10 years we've seen a more neutral type of farming being developed, and I think what we'll see in the future is things will begin to go full circle.
There's an urban renaissance too. Single people and childless couples are opting for city centre living, and the urban environment will have much more than just shops and offices. But the countryside's still being eaten up. There's a need for more homes. They have to go somewhere, and though most people say they care about the green belt, it doesn't stop them wanting to move there. We need to make towns more attractive so people will want to live in them. Otherwise, the countryside will carry on shrinking.
I think our worst fears would be more of the same, really. I think more development in the countryside, that sort of inappropriate development, more pressure on green belts, which will obviously lead to further decline of urban areas, making quality of life worse for people in urban areas and in the countryside.
But there are good reasons why those fears might come true, and it comes down to money. In towns and cities there's a tax on redevelopment, but in the country it's a different picture. Greenfield developments are tax-free, and the more green land you're allowed to build on, the cheaper it becomes. Lower land prices mean affordable homes for families. Economic forecasters see it happening.
The city will be big news in the future, but at the same time people are going to move out from suburbia, and suburbia will extend into greater hinterland. We actually think over the longer term there is going to be immense pressure to build on green belt, and really 2 decades from now we can't actually be sure the green belt policy will even be in existence. This sounds extreme, but we actually think it's a very strong possibility.
All the more important then to make urban areas greener. Middlesbrough is one of the UK's environment cities, testbeds of good practice. There's a very clear vision of how they'd like the borough to look.
Here we are in the year 2020, and Middlesbrough's quite a pleasant place, isn't it? If we wander around the town centre, you'll see there isn't much traffic. What traffic there is very clean and unpolluting. Most people use the public transport, the buses and the trams, or they use the electric taxis to drive around the town in. It's a much greener place than it used to be as well. You notice the amount of greenery, the number of trees around, and if we go to the edge of town, then we're in the middle of the Cleveland Community Forest, which was begun during the 1990s and has now become immature. So quite a pleasant place to be in.
In this vision, the Transporter Bridge is the hub of a revived waterfront where you can watch seals and otters in the Tees. One of the town's biggest employers is the waste recycling business.
We're back in the 1990s, and that was just our vision of the future. It was a very attractive vision. It's a bit ambitious perhaps to achieve it by 2020, but it is something we can focus on and work towards.
Local people have joined in, and one forward-looking group call themselves Acklam 2020. They're protecting woodlands and recycling everything they can.
I know some people say, we're only fiddling about doing little bits around the edges, but I think we can make a big difference we can think global and act local, and I think that really will make a difference if we all do a little bit, and we would all help the environment then. We've got to help each other, we've got to care for each other and the environment.
Something we could all do is save energy and turn out the lights. 1/4 of carbon dioxide emissions come from our homes, but people are slow to get the energy efficiency message, according to those promoting it.
It's very easy for people to sit down and do nothing, and if we sit down and do nothing, our houses will remain fairly inefficient, and it would be catastrophic for the environment.
In future, house sellers may have to give potential buyers their home energy rating, along with other information contained in the normal house survey. That might even lead us to invest in solar panels and our own backyard wind turbines. Today, wind power is the only economically viable source of renewable energy, but it can be controversial.
We'd like to see the wind power being generated in places where the community wants it as well, and to create opportunities for offshore wind power and inshore, but where it's suitable.
But solar power is still awaiting a technological breakthrough. It works on an experimental scale, but collecting enough power for Britain's needs would mean covering the land with solar panels. The solution to the problem has so far eluded us. But now there's a new science offering tantalizing possibilities. Nanotechnology, a way to break the bonds of nature. And it starts with giving the mighty atom a good shove. 3 atoms together measure just 1/1,000,000th of a millimetre. They exist in strong chemical bonds, but if that can be broken, atoms can be rearranged into new structures. Scientists believe they can eventually create millions of atom-sized machines powered by their own chemical and electrical reactions. Deep within Newcastle University, they're using powerful microscopes and electrical currents to push individual atoms into new patterns never before known.
That is one of the most powerful aspects of nanotechnology. We're not relying anymore on nature, on what nature delivers us.
Nature gives us the sunrise, but what if we could make atom-sized devices programmed to grab the sun's heat? Millions of tiny machines together could work like a power station. Made from the right compounds, they could even be painted onto roads.
Small solar collecting devices could, for example, be used in the surfaces of roads to collect light and convert it into solar energy. It does have possibilities, and the big advantage of that is that it's using, as a solar collector, an area of the country which is already being used for another purpose, and so it does not result in any further destruction of the environment.
The applications will be limitless if we can rearrange atoms into these patterns. Tiny nanorobots could burrow into waste to pick out chemical elements for reuse. Minuscule sensors could alert us to pollution. New materials could give us ultralight aircraft using far less fuel, and much more. They'll be the midget gems of the science world. There's even talk of producing energy from thin air, grabbing carbon atoms to use for fuel, solving global warming and the energy crisis. Is there a downside? We'll have to wait and see.
Our record in the past of forecasting what would be possible in the future is not particularly good. I think that we have to assume that with such a powerful new methods of creating new materials, new devices, that the impact on all walks of life is likely to be enormous.
Next week, after engineered plants, will it be engineered people? Your future health on 2020.